Rain pounded against the windshield as James Mitchell navigated his old pickup truck through the winding mountain roads of Pine Valley. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the dense Colorado forest. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as memories of that night 5 years ago threatened to surface. The night that had cost him everything he'd worked for in the big city. Now, here he was, running a small veterinary clinic in a town most people had never heard of. The beam of his headlights caught something small and dark, huddled against a fallen log. James almost drove past. He'd learned the hard way not to get involved in every apparent crisis, but something made him slow down. Through the rain-streaked window, he caught a glimpse of what looked like a puppy, its fur matted with mud and blood, shivering violently in the storm. "Not tonight," he muttered, but his foot was already easing onto the brake. Lightning flashed again, and this time he saw the creature's eyes, golden, intelligent, and filled with a pain that reached straight into his soul. The look was hauntingly familiar, reminding him of another pair of eyes he'd failed to save years ago. If you're watching this right now, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next, because this story is about to take an unexpected turn that shocked everyone in Pine Valley. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors filled James's modest clinic as he worked to save the small creature's life. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning wounds and checking vitals, while his mind tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Something about this puppy wasn't quite right. The bone structure, the unusual markings around its eyes, the shape of its paws, they didn't match any dog breed he knew, and he'd studied them all. Amy Cooper's voice startled him from his concentration. The wildlife researcher had become a regular at his clinic since he'd moved to Pine Valley, though he'd done his best to keep their relationship strictly professional. "Jim, Linda at the cafe said you might need help." She paused in the doorway, her eyes widening as she saw the small patient on his examination table. "What is that?" "A puppy," James replied automatically, though doubt crept into his voice. "At least, I think it is. Found it on Cedar Ridge Road." He gestured to the unusual markings he'd noticed. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" Amy moved closer, her expertise in local wildlife evident in the way she studied the unconscious animal. "These markings," she began, then stopped, pulling out her phone to compare something. "Jim, I need to make a call." Before she could explain further, Mark Thompson burst through the clinic door, his park ranger uniform soaked from the storm. "Got a report of an injured animal," he said, then froze when he saw what lay on the examination table. "Well, I'll be damned." The three of them stood in silence, watching the slow rise and fall of the creature's chest. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the small clinic, something extraordinary was beginning, though none of them yet realized just how much this night would change their lives. Linda Chen would later say she knew something was different the moment she saw James's truck parked outside his clinic at midnight. The cafe owner had known him since he'd first arrived in Pine Valley, had watched him keep everyone at arm's length, had seen the pain he carried. But that night, as she delivered coffee and sandwiches to the small group gathered around the mysterious patient, she saw something she hadn't seen before, a spark of the man he used to be. "You can't stay here all night," she told him, though she knew he would. "I have to," James replied softly, his eyes never leaving the monitors. "I can't lose this one, Linda. I just can't." As Linda left the clinic, she paused in the doorway, watching James check the creature's vitals one more time. Amy sat nearby, poring over wildlife records on her laptop, while Mark made calls to colleagues about unusual animal sightings in the area. Something was happening here, something that felt like the beginning of a story Pine Valley would never forget. If this story has caught your attention so far, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. The events that unfolded next in Pine Valley would leave the entire community speechless. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when the mysterious puppy finally opened its eyes. James, who had dozed off in a chair beside the examination table, woke to find those same intelligent golden eyes studying him intently. But in the clear morning light, his doubts about the creature's identity grew stronger. "Hey there," he said softly, reaching out slowly. The animal didn't flinch away, but instead pressed its head into his hand with surprising gentleness. Its fur, now cleaned of mud and blood, revealed patterns he'd never seen before. The wounds he'd treated were healing remarkably fast. Too fast for a normal puppy. Amy arrived early, carrying fresh coffee and a thick folder of research materials. "I think I know what we're dealing with," she began. But before she could continue, the puppy did something that made them both freeze. It stood up on shaky legs and made a sound that was definitely not a bark. James Mitchell had no way of knowing that morning that his life was about to change forever, or that the small creature he'd saved would unlock not only the mysteries of Pine Valley's wilderness, but also the walls he'd built around his heart. The truth about his unusual patient would shock the entire community and force them all to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the wild world around them. Dawn painted Pine Valley's mountains in shades of lavender and gold as James Mitchell sorted through the test results spread across his desk. The small creature he'd rescued the night before slept peacefully in a makeshift recovery pen, its chest rising and falling with surprising strength given its condition just hours ago. The sound of gravel crunching under tires drew his attention. Through the clinic's frosted windows, he recognized Amy Cooper's Forest Service vehicle pulling into the lot. The wildlife researcher had become a frequent visitor since mysterious animal sightings began increasing in the national forest. The bell above the door chimed softly as Amy entered, her arms full of reference books and a laptop. She stopped short when she saw the sleeping creature, her eyes widening with professional interest. "I got your message," she said quietly, moving closer to study their unusual patient. "But you didn't mention..." Her voice trailed off as she noticed the peculiar markings around the animal's eyes, the unusual bone structure of its face. James watched her expression shift from curiosity to something closer to disbelief. "These patterns," she murmured, pulling out her phone to take photos. "I've never seen anything like them in any known canine species." James nodded, gesturing to the test results. "Blood work came back inconclusive. The cellular structure is different. And watch this." He gently lifted a bandage, revealing wounds that should have taken weeks to heal, showing remarkable recovery after just one night. The creature stirred in its sleep, making a sound that was definitely not a typical puppy whimper. Both humans froze, watching as it shifted position, its form seeming to momentarily blur at the edges before settling again. "There's more," James said, leading Amy to his office. He pulled up footage from the clinic's security camera, showing the moment he'd brought the creature in from the storm. Frame by frame, they watched as the supposedly unconscious animal's reflection in the window didn't quite match its physical form. Before Amy could respond, Mark Thompson's ranger truck pulled up outside. The veteran park ranger entered, bringing the sharp scent of pine needles and mountain air. His usual confident demeanor faltered slightly when he saw what lay in the recovery pen. "So it's true," Mark said quietly, removing his hat. "We've been getting strange reports from hikers, unusual tracks, sounds that don't match any known species. I thought they were just stories until..." He gestured at their sleeping patient, Linda Chen arrived next, carrying a box of fresh pastries from her cafe. The unflappable restaurant owner had appointed herself as the clinic's unofficial caretaker since James had moved to town. She set down her delivery and moved to examine their mysterious guest. "My grandmother used to tell stories," Linda said thoughtfully, watching the creature's chest rise and fall. "About beings that walked between worlds, choosing when and how to be seen. Most people dismissed them as fairy tales, but she insisted every word was true." The creature's eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that shifted color like sunlight through leaves. It focused immediately on James, and he felt something brush against his mind. Not quite words, but definitely communication. Images flashed through his consciousness: moonlit mountains, ancient forests, and beings that moved like living shadows through the night. "That's impossible," Amy whispered, but her scientific skepticism was warring with the evidence before her eyes. The creature had risen to its feet, moving with a grace that defied its injured state. Its form seemed to shift subtly, becoming somehow more and less than what they expected to see. Sarah Wilson, one of Linda's regular customers, chose that moment to deliver fresh coffee to the clinic. The young hiker stopped in the doorway, her face draining of color as she saw their patient. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I've seen one before," she said softly. "Up in the high meadows at dawn. I thought I was imagining things, but..." The creature made that strange sound again, but this time it carried a note of acknowledgement. Through their strengthening mental connection, James understood that Sarah wasn't the only one who had glimpsed these beings. They had always been there, watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the visiting cryptozoologist Amy had contacted, arrived with a car full of specialized equipment. Her academic demeanor cracked slightly as she took in the scene before her. "In all my years of research," she began, then stopped as the creature turned its extraordinary gaze toward her. The air in the clinic seemed to thicken with possibility. As their unusual patient fully awakened, its form became more fluid, less bound by ordinary physics. The wounds that had brought it to James's care were healing at an impossible rate, leaving behind markings that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Bob Parker, the town's retired wildlife expert, appeared in the doorway next. His weathered face showed no surprise at the gathering, nor at the clearly supernatural being in their midst. "The old stories are waking up," he said simply, leaning on his cane. "The veils between worlds are growing thin again." Through the strengthening mental link, James began to understand the truth. This creature hadn't randomly crossed his path in the storm. It had chosen to be found, chosen him specifically, though the full purpose of that choice remained unclear. Emily Foster from the local newspaper arrived to cover what she thought was a routine story about the clinic's community service. Her reporter's instincts kicked in immediately as she sensed the charged atmosphere. "There's more happening here than meets the eye," she said, reaching for her notebook. The creature's response was to let its form shift more dramatically, removing any doubt about its supernatural nature. The assembled humans watched in wonder as it demonstrated abilities that defied natural law, while somehow remaining beautiful rather than threatening. David Brooks from the town council was the last to arrive, drawn by rumors of unusual activity at the clinic. His practical mind struggled to process what he was seeing, but something in the creature's presence seemed to bypass his rational objections. As morning fully arrived in Pine Valley, the small group of witnesses found themselves drawn into something larger than they could have imagined. Their worlds, scientific, practical, mundane, were expanding to include possibilities that would change everything they thought they knew. The creature had become a bridge between realities, and through their growing connection, James understood that his role as its healer was just the beginning. Together, they would help others navigate the rediscovery of magic in their midst, helping Pine Valley remember truths it had long forgotten. Outside, the mountain air shimmered with potential as ancient powers stirred from their slumber. Inside, the clinic, a small group of people watched in wonder as their ordinary world transformed into something extraordinary, one impossible moment at a time. Pine Valley woke to a blanket of unexpected snow, unseasonable for early autumn. James stood at his clinic window, watching crystalline flakes swirl in the pre-dawn light. The creature, he still struggled with what to call it, sat beside him, its form seeming to shift and flow like the shadows cast by falling snow. In the week since he'd found it, its growth had been extraordinary, its body changing in ways that defied natural law. Amy burst through the door, bringing a gust of cold air and excitement. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with discovery. "You need to see this," she said, pulling out her tablet. The screen showed thermal imaging footage from one of her research cameras high in the mountains. Strange heat signatures moved through the forest, their patterns unlike anything James had ever seen. "There are more of them," she whispered, glancing at their mysterious guest. "They've been here all along, hiding in plain sight." The creature made that distinctive chirping sound, but this time it carried a note of what could only be described as pride. Mark Thompson arrived moments later, shaking snow from his ranger jacket. "We've got a situation," he announced grimly. 3 hikers went missing near Cedar Ridge last night. Search and rescue is mobilizing, but this snow..." He trailed off, looking meaningfully at their supernatural ward. The creature stood, its posture alert. James felt that now familiar brush against his consciousness, stronger than before. Images flashed through his mind. Steep cliffs, a hidden cave, 3 people huddled against the cold. The message was clear. It knew where the hikers were and it wanted to help. "No," James said firmly, understanding its intention. "You're not fully healed, and if anyone sees you..." The creature fixed him with those ancient eyes, and he felt the weight of its wisdom press against his thoughts. This wasn't just about saving lives. It was about trust, about bridging worlds that had grown too far apart. Linda appeared with thermoses of hot coffee, taking in the tense scene. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the right choice isn't the safe choice." She'd become their unlikely anchor over the past week, her cafe transforming into an unofficial headquarters for their growing circle of confidants. The creature's form began to change, no longer bothering to maintain its puppy-like appearance. Its body elongated, muscles rippling beneath fur that shimmered with an otherworldly iridescence. The transformation was both beautiful and terrifying, like watching a myth take shape before their eyes. "I'm coming with you," James declared, grabbing his emergency medical kit. The creature chirped its agreement, and he understood that this had been its plan all along. Their fates had been intertwined from the moment he'd found it in the rain. Amy quickly organized the search patterns, coordinating with Mark to keep the official rescue teams focused on other areas. The creature led them into the forest, moving with fluid grace through the deepening snow. Its paw prints left strange patterns that seemed to fade moments after they were made, as if the very ground was conspiring to keep its secrets. As they climbed higher into the mountains, James felt the air change. The snow fell in impossible patterns, swirling around them, like a living thing. The creature's power seemed to grow stronger here, among the ancient pines and weathered rocks. Its form shifted constantly now, sometimes appearing almost transparent, like a ghost made of moonlight and mountain shadows. They found the hikers, exactly where the creature had shown him, trapped in a narrow cave after losing their way in yesterday's sudden storm. The rescue itself was straightforward enough, but explaining how they'd known exactly where to look would prove more challenging. One of the hikers, a young woman named Sarah, watched the creature with wide eyes as James checked her for injuries. "I saw you in my dreams last night," she whispered to it. "You were calling us, showing us how to stay warm, telling us help was coming." The creature chirped softly, acknowledging her words. The journey back down the mountain was like walking through two worlds at once. The creature's influence made the harsh terrain easier to navigate, but it also revealed glimpses of things that shouldn't exist. Shadows that moved against the wind, lights that danced between the trees, echoes of songs in languages no human throat could produce. Back at the clinic, as the rescued hikers were reunited with their families, James noticed the creature watching the celebrations with an expression that seemed almost wistful. He felt its consciousness touch his again, sharing memories of its own kind, of communities bound by bonds deeper than blood. That evening, as word of the miraculous rescue spread through town, more visitors arrived at the clinic. Bob Parker brought ancient books filled with legends of mountain spirits and guardians. Emily Foster came with questions about the strange lights people had reported seeing in the forest. Even David Brooks stopped by, his skepticism warring with the evidence of his own eyes. The creature seemed to enjoy the attention, though James noticed it was careful about how much of its true nature it revealed to each visitor. To some, it appeared as nothing more than an unusual dog. To others, it offered glimpses of its otherworldly aspects. It was teaching them all, James realized, slowly preparing them for a truth too vast to grasp all at once. Amy spent hours documenting everything, though she'd abandoned any pretense of scientific detachment. "There's so much we don't understand," she admitted, watching the creature comfort a child who'd brought in an injured bird. The bird's wings had been broken, but under the creature's gentle touch, they mended before their eyes. The snow continued to fall as night descended, but it no longer felt natural. The flakes seemed to carry messages, patterns that tugged at the edge of comprehension. James found himself standing outside his clinic, watching the transformed landscape. With new eyes, Linda joined him, wrapping her hands around a steaming mug. "The whole town's talking," she said, "about miracles, about changes in the forest, about things they've always known but never admitted to seeing." She smiled softly. "You've started something, Jim. Something big." The creature emerged from the clinic, its form majestic in the snowy twilight. It was nearly full-grown now, its body radiating a power that made the air itself seem to shimmer. Gone was any resemblance to a normal animal. This was a being of legend, a bridge between worlds. As if summoned by its presence, more lights appeared in the mountains, moving with purpose through the gathering darkness. The creature raised its head and made a sound that was neither chirp nor howl, but something ancient and profound. The lights responded, dancing and swirling in patterns that spoke of welcome and reunion. James felt the creature's joy and longing wash over him, understanding at last the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about saving a mysterious puppy or discovering a new species. This was about reawakening something that had been sleeping in these mountains for centuries, waiting for the right moment, the right person, to help bridge the gap between what was and what could be. Bob Parker's weathered voice carried on the wind as he recited words from one of his ancient texts. "When the guardians return, they will choose their allies with care, seeking those who carry wounds that mirror their own. For in the healing of one world lies the salvation of both." The creature turned to James, and in its eyes he saw reflected all the pain of his past mistakes, all the potential of his future choices. Its message was clear. They were bound together now, not by chance, but by destiny, each holding pieces of the other's redemption. As the strange snow continued to fall, transforming Pine Valley into something out of a fairy tale, James realized that his life had become part of a story far older and deeper than he could have imagined. The creature had never been just a puppy, and he had never been just a veterinarian hiding from his past. They were both guardians now, standing at the threshold between worlds, ready to help others cross the bridge between what they feared and what they could become. The lights in the mountains grew stronger, calling to something deep within the creature's soul. Yet it made no move to leave, instead pressing close to James's side, sharing warmth and purpose. Together, they watched the snow fall, each flake carrying promises of wonders yet to come, of healing yet to be done, of bridges yet to be built between the world of mundane miracles and the realm of ancient magic that had chosen Pine Valley as its awakening place. In the days that followed, more strands of this emerging tapestry would begin to weave themselves together, drawing both beauty and danger into their lives. But for now, in this moment of quiet transformation, James finally understood why he'd been unable to drive past that huddled form on that rainy night. Some choices are made by destiny long before we realize we're making them. The creature chirped softly, its form shimmering with possibilities, and James felt the last of his protective walls crumble away. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The man who needed to remember how to trust, and the being that had chosen to trust him first. In that trust lay the seeds of changes that would transform not just Pine Valley, but the very boundaries between what was possible and what was merely imagined. Above them, the strange snow continued to fall, each flake carrying whispers of ancient secrets finally ready to be revealed. Pine Valley was awakening to magic, and nothing would ever be the same again. Sunrise painted the snow-covered peaks of Pine Valley in shades of amber and rose, but James Mitchell barely noticed the beauty. His attention was fixed on the strange tracks leading away from his clinic, tracks that seemed to glow faintly in the early morning light before fading away like morning mist. The creature had ventured out during the night for the first time since its rescue, leaving behind these ethereal markers of its passage. Amy Cooper's research vehicle pulled up beside him, her usual enthusiasm dampened by concern. "We've got a company coming," she announced without preamble. "The university's leading cryptozoologist, Dr. Rebecca Hayes, is on her way. Someone leaked photos of our unusual friend." The news sent a chill through James that had nothing to do with the mountain. He'd known they couldn't keep their secret forever, but he'd hoped for more time. Inside the clinic, the creature lifted its head, its form rippling like heat waves over desert sand. Its growth had stabilized, but its appearance now shifted constantly, between forms, each one more extraordinary than the last. "That's not all," Amy continued, pulling out her tablet. "The thermal imaging cameras picked up something strange last night. Multiple signatures moving in formation through the forest. They're gathering, Jim. Whatever our friend is, it's not alone anymore." The creature made that distinctive sound. No longer a chirp, but a melodic tone that seemed to resonate with the very mountains themselves. Images flooded James's mind. Ancient gatherings, ceremonies of power, bridges between worlds opening as they had for millennia. The creature was trying to tell him something urgent, something about timing and celestial alignments. Linda burst through the clinic door, her usually calm demeanor shaken. "Turn on the news," she demanded, reaching for the small television in the waiting room. The morning broadcast showed grainy footage of lights dancing above Pine Valley, captured by multiple residents the night before. The anchors were attempting to explain it away as atmospheric phenomena, but their voices held notes of uncertainty. "The whole town's buzzing," Linda continued. "Mrs. Henderson swears she saw shadows moving through her garden that walked like people but weren't people. The Miller kids say their pets have been acting strange, all facing the mountains at the same time and making unusual sounds." The creature moved to the window, its form now resembling something from ancient mythology. Part wolf, part deer, part something entirely other. Its golden eyes reflected knowledge that seemed to span centuries. James felt its consciousness brush against his, sharing glimpses of what was coming. A gathering of powers, a renewal of ancient pacts, a choosing of allies among the human world. Mark Thompson arrived next, his ranger uniform dusted with frost that sparkled unnaturally in the morning light. "The forest is changing," he reported, his voice hushed with awe and concern. "Trees that were dormant for winter are blooming. Animals are behaving differently. It's like the whole ecosystem is responding to some signal we can't quite hear." Bob Parker's arrival brought more revelations. The retired wildlife expert had spent the night translating passages from his collection of local legends. "According to these texts," he explained, spreading brittle pages across James's desk, "every few centuries, the guardians of the mountain gather to renew their connection with our world. They choose human allies, bridges between realms, to maintain the balance between the mundane and the magical." The creature chirped its confirmation, and this time, the mental images it shared were clearer than ever. James saw gatherings stretching back through time, saw humans and beings of legend working together to protect both their worlds. He understood now why the creature had chosen him that rainy night. Not just because he needed healing, but because he had the capacity to accept and adapt to a reality larger than himself. Emily Foster pushed through the growing crowd in the clinic, her reporter's notepad already full of observations. "People are talking about changes they can't explain," she said. "The snow that falls but doesn't feel cold. The way the mountains look different depending on how you squint at them. The music that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once." The creature's form shifted again, and this time there was no pretense of maintaining a mundane appearance. Its body seemed made of moonlight and shadow, its movements liquid grace, its presence filling the room with an energy that made the air itself feel alive with possibility. Dr. Rebecca Hayes' arrival was heralded by a fleet of university vehicles. The renowned cryptozoologist strode into the clinic with an air of academic authority that faltered visibly when she came face to face with the creature. "Impossible," she whispered, her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. The creature regarded her calmly, then did something unprecedented. It began to glow, its form becoming translucent, revealing patterns of energy that flowed through its body like constellations. The display was both beautiful and deliberately overwhelming, a clear message that it would not be reduced to a scientific specimen. "There are more coming," Amy announced, checking her latest sensor readings. "The thermal signatures are converging on Pine Valley from all directions. Whatever's about to happen, it's happening soon." James felt the creature's agreement along with a sense of urgency. The gathering it had shown him in visions was approaching, a convergence of powers that would reshape the boundaries between worlds. Pine Valley had been chosen as the focal point, and its residents would need to decide how to respond to the awakening magic in their midst. David Brooks arrived with other members of the town council, their faces showing varying degrees of concern and wonder. "We need to prepare," the councilman said, his usual skepticism replaced by pragmatic acceptance. "If our town is about to become a crossroads between worlds, we need to be ready." The creature's approval radiated through the room like warmth from a hidden sun. It had been preparing them for this, James realized, using its own gradual revelation to help them adapt to the existence of magic in their midst. Each shifted form, each demonstrated power, had been a careful step in expanding their understanding of what was possible. As if in response to this realization, the creature began to change again, Its form grew larger, more majestic, incorporating elements of every shape it had shown them before while transcending them all. The being that stood before them now was clearly a guardian of legend, a protector of boundaries between worlds, a keeper of ancient wisdom, a bridge between what was known and what was possible. Through their strengthened mental connection, James understood that this was the creature's true form, or at least the closest approximation of it that human minds could comprehend. The puppy-like appearance he'd first encountered had been both a necessary disguise and a way of testing his capacity for compassion. Linda, ever practical, began organizing the growing crowd in the clinic. "If we're about to host a gathering of legendary beings," she declared, "we should at least make sure everyone's properly fed and comfortable." The mundane concern in the face of the extraordinary somehow made everything feel more manageable. Amy worked with Dr. Hayes to document everything, though both women seemed to understand that their scientific instruments could capture only the surface of what was occurring. The creature allowed their observations with patient tolerance, occasionally adding its own insights through carefully shared mental images. Outside, the strange snow continued to fall, but now everyone could see that each flake carried tiny patterns of light, messages written in a language older than words. The mountains themselves seemed to be shifting, revealing hints of paths and structures that existed somewhere between physical reality and ancient memory. Mark coordinated with his ranger teams to subtly direct hikers and tourists away from the areas where the thermal signatures were strongest. "We need to give them space," he explained. "Whatever's coming, it needs to happen without interference from the merely curious." Bob Parker spent hours comparing his ancient texts with what they were witnessing. "The legends speak of a time of renewal," he said, "when the veils between worlds grow thin and the guardians gather to strengthen the bonds that keep both realms in balance. But they always choose human allies to help maintain those bonds throughout the years between gatherings." James felt the truth of those words resonate through his connection with the creature. He understood now that saving what he'd thought was an injured puppy had been only the beginning. He was being invited to become part of something vastly larger than himself, a partnership between worlds that would call on all his capacity for healing, growth, and acceptance. The creature moved to his side, its presence both comforting and challenging. Through their shared consciousness, James saw glimpses of what his role might become, not just a veterinarian who could treat mundane animals, but a healer who could work with beings from both realms, helping to maintain the health and harmony of this unique intersection between worlds. As evening approached, more lights appeared in the mountains, some distant, others drawing steadily closer to Pine Valley. The air grew thick with potential, with the sense of ancient powers stirring after long slumber. The creature's excitement was palpable, radiating through the clinic in waves that made everyone's skin tingle with anticipation. Dr. Hayes sat in a corner, frantically trying to reconcile her scientific training with what she was witnessing. "We're going to need a new classification system," she muttered. "A whole new framework for understanding reality itself." The creature's response was a sound that could only be described as laughter, not mocking, but gently amused at the human need to categorize and classify the infinite varieties of existence. Through James, it shared a deeper truth, that understanding would come not through classification, but through experience and acceptance. As night fell over Pine Valley, the gathering power in the mountains grew stronger. The strange snow swirled in complex patterns, creating momentary windows through which other landscapes could be glimpsed. Realms where the laws of physics were more suggestions than rules, where magic and matter flowed together in endless dance. The creature stood at the center of it all, its form now radiating light that cast no shadows, its presence a beacon calling to others of its kind. Through their connection, James felt the approach of ancient powers, of beings that had walked the earth when humans were still learning to make fire. Pine Valley stood on the brink of transformation, preparing to become a nexus between worlds. And at the heart of it all was the bond between a man who had once lost his way and a being that had chosen to help him find it again. A partnership that would help bridge the gap between what was and what could be. The next phase of their journey was about to begin, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Moonlight bathed Pine Valley in an otherworldly glow as streams of ethereal energy pulsed through the mountain air. The creature, now fully transformed into its majestic true form, stood motionless at the edge of the forest behind James's clinic. Its presence commanded attention, drawing eyes from every window in town to the remarkable display of power unfolding in their midst. Midnight approached when the first of the others arrived. They emerged from between the trees like living shadows, each one different, yet bearing the same unmistakable air of ancient power. Some moved like liquid moonlight, others seemed formed from mountain mist and starlight. Their appearances shifted, constantly, as if human eyes couldn't quite grasp their true nature. "Remarkable," Dr. Hayes breathed, her scientific detachment crumbling in the face of such undeniable magic. She'd set up monitoring equipment around the clinic's perimeter, but every device was registering impossible readings. The energy signatures are off the charts. It's like watching multiple dimensions intersect. James felt the creature's consciousness merge more deeply with his own, sharing understanding beyond words. These beings weren't just magical animals or supernatural entities. They were guardians of reality itself, maintaining the delicate balance between the mundane world and realms of pure possibility. Amy worked feverishly at her laptop, correlating data from various sensors throughout the valley. "The wildlife is responding," she reported. "Every animal within miles is oriented toward this gathering. It's like they recognize something. Something primal." Linda had transformed her cafe into a command center of sorts, providing coffee and sustenance to the growing group of witnesses. The town's residents gathered in small clusters, their faces illuminated by the strange lights, dancing through the valley. Fear mingled with wonder as they watched their familiar world reshape itself around them. "The old stories," Bob Parker murmured, his weathered hands trembling as he held open an ancient text. "They speak of a gathering like this, a convergence of powers when the barriers between worlds grow thin. But it only happens when great change is coming, change that affects both realms." The creature turned its luminous gaze toward James, sharing visions of what was to come. He saw the boundaries between worlds stretching, straining under pressures both natural and human-made. Modern development pushed against ancient territories. Technology disrupted age-old energy patterns, and the delicate balance that the Guardians maintained was beginning to falter. Mark Thompson burst through the clinic door, his ranger uniform dusted with something that sparkled like stardust. "The Forest Service is getting flooded with calls," he reported. "Lights in the sky, strange sounds, animals behaving unusually. We can't keep this contained much longer." Emily Foster's camera clicked rapidly as she documented the gathering, though James noticed that each photo captured something slightly different, as if the beings existed in multiple states simultaneously. "People need to know," she argued when Dr. Hayes suggested classified research protocols. "The world needs to understand what we're witnessing." The creature's response rippled through their minds, a sense of agreement tinged with caution. Humanity needed to remember the magic that existed alongside their mundane reality, but the revelation had to come gradually in ways that wouldn't shatter society's foundations. David Brooks paced nervously, his pragmatic mind struggling to formulate a plan. "The town needs guidance," he insisted. "Protocol, structure. How do we govern a community that's becoming a crossroads between worlds?" A new presence made itself known, a being that seemed ancient even compared to the other. Guardians. It emerged from the very substance of the mountain, its form incorporating elements of stone and starlight, tree and shadow. The creature greeted it with a deep bow, and through their connection, James understood this was one of the original guardians, one who had walked these mountains since they first rose from the earth. The Ancient One's consciousness touched them, all sharing wisdom accumulated over eons. James saw glimpses of Pine Valley's past, indigenous peoples who had lived in harmony with the Guardians, settlers who had glimpsed magic but chosen to forget, moments throughout history when the veils between worlds had grown thin. Dr. Hayes dropped her scientific instruments, recognizing their inadequacy in the face of such profound mystery. "We're not here to study them," she realized aloud. "We're here to learn from them, to remember what we've forgotten." The gathered guardians began to move in complex patterns, their forms flowing together like streams, merging into a river of pure energy. The strange snow that had blanketed the valley rose into the air, each flake becoming a point of light in an intricate dance of power. Through his deepening connection with the creature, James understood that this was more than just a display. It was a renewal of ancient bonds, a strengthening of the bridges between worlds. But it was also an invitation, a call to those humans who could help maintain these connections in the times to come. Linda watched the supernatural dance with practical wonder. "We're going to need bigger coffee pots," she mused, already planning how to adapt her cafe to serve both human and otherworldly visitors. Her simple acceptance of the extraordinary somehow made it all seem more manageable. Amy's research took on new meaning as she realized she wasn't just documenting unknown creatures, but witnessing the intersection of multiple realities. "Every culture has stories about magical beings," she said excitedly. "What if they were all true, just glimpses of the same truth from different angles?" The ancient guardian moved through the gathering, touching each being in turn, sharing power and purpose. When it reached James, the contact was like diving into a pool of liquid starlight. He saw his role with sudden clarity, not just as a healer of physical wounds, but as a bridge between worlds, helping to maintain the health of both realms. Bob Parker's ancient texts began to glow faintly, their words rearranging themselves to reveal deeper meanings. "The stories are alive," he whispered in awe. "They're not just recording history, they're part of it, changing as our understanding grows." Emily Foster found her camera capturing images that seemed impossible. Moments between moments, spaces between spaces. "How do we share this truth?" she wondered aloud. "How do we help people understand without destroying the mystery?" The creature's response flowed through their shared consciousness, a vision of gradual awakening, of humans remembering their connection to magic, one small revelation at a time. Pine Valley would become a seed of that awakening, a place where the extraordinary and ordinary could coexist openly. Mark coordinated with his ranger teams, establishing new protocols for areas where the veils between worlds were thinnest. "We need to protect both sides," he explained. "Give them space to interact without interference." Dr. Hayes abandoned her attempts at scientific classification, instead beginning to document the ways in which the Guardian's presence affected the local ecosystem. "They're not separate from nature," she realized. "They're part of it, the part we've forgotten how to see." The gathering reached a crescendo as midnight struck. The air itself seemed to crystallize, filled with patterns of pure energy that connected every being present, human and guardian alike. Through these connections, knowledge flowed freely, helping each side understand the other more deeply. James felt the creature's satisfaction as the bonds between worlds strengthened. This was what it had been working toward since that rainy night, not just its own healing or even James's, but a renewal of ancient partnerships that could help both realms face the challenges ahead. Linda's cafe began to adapt before their eyes, its spaces shifting subtly to accommodate beings that existed partially outside normal physics. "Everyone needs a place to belong," she said simply, watching as guardians and humans began to share the same spaces with growing comfort. The Ancient One shared visions of how Pine Valley would change, becoming a place where magic and mundane reality wove together openly, where humans could remember the wonder that had always existed alongside their ordinary lives. But it would take time, patience, and understanding from both sides. Amy's research center would become a bridge of its own, not just studying the Guardians, but learning from them, helping to translate their wisdom into forms that modern humans could understand and use. "Science and magic aren't opposites," she declared. "They're different ways of describing the same reality." As the gathering continued through the night, Pine Valley itself began to transform. The boundaries between worlds remained distinct, but permeable, allowing for interaction while maintaining the necessary separation between realms. It was a delicate balance, one that would require constant attention and care. The creature moved to James's side, its form now incorporating elements of all its previous appearances while transcending them entirely. Through their connection, he understood that their partnership would be central to maintaining this new equilibrium, his human perspective complementing its ancient wisdom. David Brooks finally stopped pacing, accepting that some changes couldn't be managed, only adapted to. "We'll need new laws," he mused, "or maybe just new ways of interpreting the old ones. How do you regulate magic without destroying it?" The answer came not in words, but in understanding. A shared vision of community where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where the extraordinary and ordinary could coexist in harmony. Pine Valley would become a model for this new way of living, showing others that remembering magic didn't mean abandoning reason. As dawn approached, the gathered guardians began to disperse, but not before leaving their mark on the valley. The very air seemed charged with possibility, the landscape itself subtly altered to accommodate the flow of magic. The boundaries between worlds remained thin here, creating a space where humans could remember what they'd forgotten about the true nature of reality. James watched the sun rise over his transformed town, the creature steady at his side. Together they had started something remarkable. Not just a healing of physical wounds or personal trauma, but a healing of the rift between worlds. The journey ahead would be challenging, but they would face it together, guardians and humans working as one to protect the delicate balance between magic and mundane reality. The strange snow continued to fall, each flake carrying messages between worlds, reminding everyone who saw it that wonder still existed. It just needed the right eyes to see it and the right hearts to welcome it home. First light crept over Pine Valley's transformed landscape, revealing changes that went far beyond the physical. Crystalline formations sprouted between ancient pines, catching the dawn in facets that shimmered with otherworldly light. The creature, fully embracing its role as guardian, stood watch over the clinic's new meditation garden, a space where the boundaries between worlds had grown gossamer thin. James tended to an injured fox, its fur sparkling with traces of magical energy. The animal had wandered too close to one of the newly formed power nexuses in the forest, absorbing ethereal residue that made conventional treatment impossible. The creature guided his hands through gestures that seemed to bend reality itself, showing him how to heal wounds that existed in multiple dimensions at once. A commotion outside drew their attention. Dr. Hayes rushed in, her usual composure shattered. "They're here," she announced, her voice tight with concern. "Government officials. They're saying something about quarantine protocols and national security." Through the clinic's window, James spotted several black SUVs pulling into town. Men in dark suits emerged, carrying equipment that looked more military than scientific. The creature's form shifted subtly, its appearance becoming almost ordinary, a defensive camouflage that fooled electronic scanning devices while maintaining its true power. Amy burst through the back door, her research tablet clutched tight. "I managed to encrypt most of our data," she whispered. "But they're asking questions about the thermal imaging records, the energy signature readings. They know something unprecedented is happening here." Linda's cafe had become a natural gathering point for the town's residents as news of the officials' arrival spread. The space itself seemed to respond to the community's anxiety, its walls somehow expanding to accommodate more people while remaining exactly the same size from the outside. "We need a plan," David Brooks insisted, his councilman's pragmatism warring with his new understanding of magic. "We can't just pretend none of this is happening, but we can't reveal everything either. The consequences could be catastrophic." The creature shared images through its mental link with James, visions of other times when mundane authorities had discovered magical realms, of the damage that could result from fear and misunderstanding. But it also showed alternatives, ways of gradually introducing truth to those ready to receive it. Mark Thompson arrived in his ranger uniform, looking troubled. "They're setting up checkpoints on all the major roads," he reported, talking about unusual wildlife activity, environmental hazards, standard containment procedures except... He gestured to the crystalline growths visible through the window. "Nothing about this is standard." Emily Foster slipped into the clinic through a back entrance that seemed to appear just when needed. "My editor's demanding answers about the light phenomena," she said. "I've been stalling, but we need to decide how much of this story goes public." Bob Parker's ancient texts offered warnings about the consequences of forced revelation, but also hope. "The Guardians have faced similar challenges before," he explained, turning brittle pages with careful fingers. "They understand the need for balance between concealment and truth." Dr. Hayes paced the clinic's waiting room, her scientific training providing unexpected insight. "We need to give them something," she mused. "Enough data to satisfy their immediate concerns without revealing the full scope of what's really happening here." The creature's approval rippled through their shared consciousness. Through James, it began sharing a strategy, a way of presenting Pine Valley's transformation as a unique but natural phenomenon, something extraordinary, but not supernatural. The truth would remain visible to those ready to see it, while others would find explanations that fit their understanding of reality. A sharp knock at the clinic's door made everyone freeze. Two men in dark suits stood outside, their faces professionally neutral. The creature melted into the shadows, its presence becoming subtle but not entirely hidden. James opened the door, projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel. "Dr. Mitchell?" the taller agent asked, presenting credentials. "We're with a special environmental task force. We'd like to ask you some questions about recent unusual activity in the area." The interview that followed was a delicate dance of half-truths and careful omissions. James described treating animals affected by unusual weather patterns, speaking of energy fields in scientific rather than magical terms. The creature watched from its shadowy corner, occasionally suggesting responses through their mental link. Amy presented carefully edited data, showing enough anomalies to be credible while obscuring the true magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Dr. Hayes supported their narrative with technical explanations that skirted the edge of conventional science without quite crossing into the realm of magic. Linda arrived with coffee and her signature calming presence, her cafe having temporarily relocated itself closer to the clinic through means that defied geometric logic. The agents accepted her hospitality while failing to notice how their cups never quite emptied, or how the room's dimensions seemed to shift slightly whenever they tried to focus on its corners. As the day progressed, more officials arrived. Environmental specialists, wildlife experts, energy consultants, each brought their own equipment, their own theories, their own attempts to quantify what was happening in Pine Valley. The creature watched it all with ancient patience, understanding that this too was part of the process of worlds remembering how to coexist. David Brooks organized a town council meeting, carefully staged to appear completely normal, while incorporating elements that would be obvious only to those aware of the magic now woven into Pine Valley's fabric. The officials attended, recording everything yet somehow missing the most significant details. Mark's ranger teams coordinated with the government forces, guiding them away from the most sensitive areas while providing plausible explanations for the phenomena they couldn't help but notice. The forest itself seemed to cooperate, shifting its more obvious magical manifestations just out of sight whenever outsiders approached. Emily Foster wrote articles that read differently depending on who was reading them. Straightforward environmental, reporting to outside eyes, but filled with deeper truth for those who knew where to look. The creature approved of her subtle approach, recognizing the power of stories to bridge understanding. Dr. Hayes found herself becoming an unexpected ally, her scientific credentials lending weight to their carefully constructed explanations, while her newfound understanding of magic helped them protect what needed protecting. Sometimes, she observed quietly, the best way to preserve a mystery is to explain it incompletely. The creature shared more visions with James as they worked together to maintain their delicate balance. He saw other communities where magic and mundane reality had learned to coexist, each finding its own way to preserve truth while preventing the kind of disruption that could damage both worlds. Linda's Cafe continued to serve as neutral ground where officials and townspeople could interact safely. The space somehow maintained perfect acoustics for private conversations, while making it impossible for recording devices to function properly. Coffee was served, paperwork was filed, and magic flowed quietly beneath the surface of ordinary life. Bob Parker's expertise proved invaluable as they wove historical context into their narrative. Local legends and documented phenomena provided precedent for Pine Valley's unusual characteristics, making current events seem more evolution than revolution. As evening approached, the government presence began to diminish. Their instruments had recorded plenty of data, but nothing that would prove conclusively that anything beyond the realm of natural science was occurring. The creature's strategy had worked. They had satisfied official curiosity while protecting the deeper truth. The creature led James to the edge of town as the sun set, sharing a vision of how Pine Valley would continue to evolve. The integration of magic would proceed, gradually, allowing both human and supernatural communities to adapt at their own pace. Those who were ready would see and understand, while others would accept explanations that fit their worldview. Amy's research center would continue its work, documenting the valley's transformation in ways that could be interpreted through multiple lenses. The data they collected would help other communities when similar awakenings occurred, providing a blueprint for harmonious integration. Dr. Hayes decided to stay in Pine Valley, recognizing that her role as a scientist could help bridge the gap between conventional understanding and magical reality. Her presence would help maintain their careful balance, providing credible explanations when needed while protecting deeper truths. The government officials departed with their data and theories, leaving behind monitoring equipment that would somehow never quite capture the true nature of what was happening in Pine Valley. The creature watched them go with satisfaction, knowing that this challenge had been met without compromising either world. As night fell, the crystalline formations began their subtle glow, and the strange snow resumed its gentle fall. The creature's true form emerged fully in the darkness, its power no longer hidden, but channeled in ways that would help both realms thrive. Through their connection, James understood that this was just the beginning. Pine Valley's transformation would continue, guided by the wisdom of the guardians and the growing understanding of its human residents. The balance they'd struck today would become a model for future integration, showing how magic and mundane reality could coexist without destroying either. The journey ahead would bring new challenges, but they would face them together, protecting the delicate harmony between worlds while helping others remember the magic that had never really left. Autumn painted Pine Valley in shades of gold and crimson, but among the natural colors, new hues emerged, leaves that shimmered with impossible colors, flowers that bloomed within a light. The creature stood at the edge of a newly formed clearing, its presence drawing attention to a circle of stones that hadn't existed the day before. Each stone pulsed with gentle luminescence, marking the boundaries of what James had come to recognize as a gateway between realms. The morning calm shattered as Sarah Wilson, one of the hikers they'd rescued months ago, burst into the clinic. Her eyes were wide with urgency. "You need to come quickly," she gasped. "Something's happening at the elementary school." James and the creature arrived to find a scene of barely contained chaos. The school's playground equipment had come alive, swing sets moving without wind, slides twisting into new shapes as delighted children watched. Principal Margaret Chen stood at the entrance, trying to maintain order while clearly struggling to process what she was seeing. "The children started it somehow," Margaret explained, her professional composure cracking slightly. "They were playing as usual, but then they began doing something. Making wishes, they said. And now..." She gestured helplessly at a jungle gym that had transformed into a crystalline structure resembling a miniature castle. The creature's mental touch carried understanding. The presence of magic in the valley had awakened latent abilities in the youngest residents, whose minds weren't yet bound by rigid concepts of possibility. Through their connection, James saw how children throughout history had often been the first to bridge the gap between worlds. Amy arrived with her monitoring equipment, but the readings made no sense. "The energy patterns are completely new," she reported. "It's like the children are acting as natural conduits, channeling power they don't even realize they're accessing." Linda appeared with hot chocolate for everyone, her cafe having temporarily extended itself into the school grounds. The warm drinks seemed to help stabilize the wild magic, giving it focus and form. The creature approved, sharing insights about how simple rituals could help guide raw power into safer expressions. Dr. Hayes observed the phenomenon with professional interest, noting how the children's interactions with magic differed from adult experiences. "They're not trying to understand it or control it," she mused. "They're simply accepting it as natural. Maybe that's what we've been missing." Mark Thompson arrived to find several of his younger rangers already on scene, their faces showing a mix of concern and wonder. The teens had started manifesting abilities of their own, an instinctive understanding of forest paths that shouldn't exist, the ability to communicate with animals in ways that transcended normal interaction. Emily Foster interviewed the children, her notebook filling with accounts that read like fairy tales but carried undeniable truth. "They're not making it up," she said quietly. "They're remembering what we all used to know before we convinced ourselves it wasn't possible." Bob Parker's ancient texts had predicted this, though no one had recognized the signs. "The awakening always begins with the young," he read from a weathered page. "Their dreams shape reality before they learn to doubt. Their wishes bridge worlds before they're taught that bridges cannot exist." David Brooks arrived from an emergency council meeting, his face etched with worry. "Parents are calling," he reported. "Some are frightened, others are excited. We need to find a way to handle this that doesn't tear the community apart." The creature moved among the children, its form shifting to match their expectations. Part playmate, part protector, part teacher. Through James, it shared ways of working with young magic users, helping them understand their gifts without losing the innocent wonder that made those gifts possible. Principal Chen watched as her playground continued to transform, ancient symbols appearing in the frost on the windows, classroom pets displaying unprecedented intelligence. "We'll need to adjust the curriculum," she said with surprising adaptability. "Perhaps it's time education acknowledged more than one kind of reality." Amy's research center began documenting the children's abilities, creating new protocols that respected both scientific method and magical possibility. "We're not studying them," she insisted. "We're learning with them, understanding how they navigate between worlds so naturally." Dr. Hayes developed a series of simple exercises to help the children focus their abilities safely. "It's like teaching them to walk," she explained. "They're going to do it anyway. We just need to help them do it without hurting themselves or others." Linda's Cafe became an after-school haven where young magic users could practice under gentle supervision. The space adapted to their needs, creating safe zones for experimentation while maintaining connections to ordinary reality. Even the most skeptical parents found it hard to deny the joy in their children's faces as they explored their newfound abilities. The creature shared memories of other awakenings throughout history, times when young minds had helped communities remember their connection to magic. Through these visions, James understood that what was happening in Pine Valley was part of a natural cycle, a restoration of balance between imagination and reason. Mark established special ranger programs for the teenagers, helping them channel their emerging talents into environmental stewardship. Under his guidance, they began healing damaged ecosystems, communicating with wildlife, and maintaining the delicate balance between natural and supernatural. Emily's articles about the school's transformation sparked interest from educational experts worldwide, though something in the valley's magic seemed to prevent outside observers from seeing its full extent. Those who needed to understand could see the truth. Others found explanations that fit their existing worldview. Bob Parker started a weekly storytelling circle where children could share their magical experiences. The ancient texts seemed to respond to their presence, revealing new layers of meaning that helped bridge understanding between traditional wisdom and emerging awareness. David Brooks worked with the town council to establish guidelines that would protect both the children and the community. "We need to create space for this," he argued, "not control it, but channel it constructively." The creature led James to understand how this awakening of young magic would affect Pine Valley's future. The children would grow up straddling multiple realities, helping to maintain connections between worlds that adults had forgotten how to see. Their natural abilities would help strengthen the bonds between ordinary and extraordinary, preventing the kind of separation that had led to magic's fading in the first place. As evening approached, the playground's transformations began to stabilize, settling into forms that somehow managed to be both magical and mundane. The children's power had found balance, guided by the creature's wisdom and the community's growing acceptance. Principal Chen scheduled a parent-teacher meeting to discuss the new developments, though the creature suggested ways to present the changes that would ease fears while preserving wonder. The school would become a bridge of its own, helping families navigate between traditional education and magical awakening. Amy continued gathering data, though her scientific instruments seemed more interested in recording the children's laughter than their energy signatures. The creature approved, understanding that joy was a more accurate measure of magical healing than any technical reading. Dr. Hayes found her role shifting from observer to facilitator, helping to create spaces where young magic users could explore their abilities safely. Her scientific background proved unexpectedly useful in developing frameworks that made the extraordinary seem manageable. Linda's cafe extended its hours to accommodate after-school practice sessions, the space somehow making room for both ordinary homework and extraordinary exploration. The creature often visited, its presence helping to stabilize the wild magic while encouraging its natural evolution. The government monitoring equipment continued to record only what it could understand, missing the true wonder of what was unfolding. In Pine Valley, the children's magic existed in spaces between official observation, growing and developing in ways that defied conventional measurement. As night fell over the transformed playground, the creature gathered the young magic users for a final lesson. Through their shared connection with James, it taught them simple techniques for managing their abilities, ways of balancing power with responsibility, wonder with wisdom. The strange snow began to fall again, but now the children could see messages in its patterns, understanding the ancient language of magic that had always existed just beyond ordinary perception. Their natural ability to accept the extraordinary without question had opened doors that adults had long thought closed. James watched as the creature guided his community's youngest members into their magical awakening, understanding that this was perhaps the most important healing he'd ever been part of. Together, they were helping to restore connections that had never truly been broken, just forgotten in the rush to grow up. The future of Pine Valley would be shaped by these children, who could walk between worlds, their innocent wisdom helping to maintain the delicate balance between magic and mundane reality. The creature's ancient knowledge, combined with their natural openness to possibility, would ensure that the awakening continued in ways that would strengthen both realms. As stars appeared above the transformed school grounds, James realized that the children's awakening was just the beginning. Their ability to accept magic without question would help the entire community remember truths that had been hidden beneath layers of adult rationality. The journey ahead would bring new challenges, but with the creature's guidance and the children's natural magic, Pine Valley would find its way forward into a future where all kinds of reality could coexist in harmony. Wind howled through Pine Valley's transformed landscape, carrying whispers of warning that only the most sensitive could hear. The creature stood alert at the clinic's entrance, its form radiating tension James hadn't seen since those first days of discovery. Something was coming, something that threatened the delicate balance they'd worked so hard to achieve. Amy burst through the door, her research tablet displaying alarming data. "The energy patterns are shifting," she announced, her voice tight with concern. "It's like the magic is being drained somehow. Something's pulling at the very fabric of what we've built here." The creature's mental touch carried images of shadow beings, entities that fed on magical energy, drawn to places where the barriers between worlds grew thin. Through their connection, James understood these weren't evil creatures, but rather a natural part of the supernatural ecosystem. However, their presence in such numbers indicated a dangerous imbalance. Mark Thompson radioed in from the forest's edge. "The animals are acting strange again," he reported. "But not like before. They're hiding, even the ones that have adapted to the magic. Something's spooking them bad." Dr. Hayes arrived with readings from her latest monitoring stations. "The crystalline formations are losing their luminescence," she observed. "It's as if something's consuming the ambient magical energy that sustains them." Linda's cafe had become unnaturally quiet, its usually bustling spaces feeling hollow and stretched. The magical extensions that had become part of its architecture were wavering, struggling to maintain their form. "Even the coffee won't stay hot," she said softly, watching steam fade too quickly from fresh-poured cups. Through the creature's memories, James saw how shadow beings had historically served as regulators, preventing magical energy from building to dangerous levels. But something had disrupted their natural patterns, driving them to feed more aggressively than necessary. Bob Parker's ancient texts spoke of similar occurrences throughout history. When the balance shifts too quickly, he read from brittle pages, the shadows come to feast, but their hunger left unchecked can drain more than just excess power. Emily Foster reported similar phenomena occurring throughout town. Gardens that had bloomed with otherworldly flowers were wilting, their magical essence being steadily depleted. The children's playground equipment had reverted to ordinary metal and plastic, losing the enchantments that had made it extraordinary. David Brooks called an emergency council meeting in the town hall. Though the building's recently acquired ability to expand for larger crowds was noticeably absent. "We need to understand what's causing this," he insisted, "before we lose everything we've gained." The creature led James to the newly formed stone circle at the forest's edge. In the fading light, they could see dark shapes moving between the trees, fluid forms that seemed to absorb both light and magic. Through their mental link, the creature shared its plan. They needed to restore balance, not by fighting the shadow beings, but by understanding what had drawn them in such numbers. Amy's monitoring equipment detected a pattern in the energy drain. "It's not random," she realized, studying the data. "They're being drawn to specific points, places where our magic intersects with old ley lines." Dr. Hayes correlated the information with geological surveys. "These shadow entities are following ancient paths," she explained. "Routes that magical energy has traveled for millennia. But something's blocking the natural flow, forcing them to feed more aggressively." The creature guided James through a mental journey, showing him how modern development had inadvertently disrupted these traditional energy channels. New construction, electromagnetic fields, and changes to the landscape had created bottlenecks where magic pooled unnaturally, attracting the shadow beings in greater numbers. Linda's cafe became a command center as they planned their response. The creature shared knowledge of how to work with, rather than against, the natural cycle of magical energy. They would need to restore the old pathways while creating new channels that could coexist with modern infrastructure. Mark mobilized his ranger teams, focusing particularly on the teenagers who had developed magical abilities. Their natural talent for working with energy would be crucial in helping to rebuild the damaged ley lines. Emily documented everything, understanding that this challenge would provide crucial lessons for other communities as they awakened to magic. Her articles began suggesting ways that urban planning could better account for supernatural energy flows. Bob Parker discovered references to similar situations in his texts, including traditional solutions that could be adapted to modern circumstances. The shadow beings hadn't come to destroy their work, but to signal that adjustments were needed. The creature led a series of rituals, teaching the community how to redirect magical energy along healthier paths. Children proved particularly adept at this work, their uninhibited creativity helping to forge new connections that satisfied both natural and supernatural needs. Dr. Hayes developed methods for measuring the success of their efforts, combining scientific observation with magical sensitivity. The shadow beings responded to their work, their feeding becoming less aggressive as energy began flowing more naturally. Linda's cafe slowly regained its magical extensions as the energy balance improved. The space began adapting again, but more organically this time, working with rather than against the natural flow of power through the valley. David Brooks worked with the town council to implement new building codes that would respect magical energy patterns. Future development would need to account for both physical and supernatural infrastructure. The creature shared visions of how Pine Valley could become a model for sustainable magical integration, demonstrating how modern communities could grow and change without disrupting essential supernatural processes. As night fell, the shadow beings began to disperse, their purpose served. The energy they had consumed would gradually replenish itself, flowing along restored and newly created. channels that worked in harmony with both natural and human-made elements. The strange snow resumed its fall, but now they could see how its patterns mapped the renewed energy flows throughout the valley. The creature's wisdom had helped them transform a potential crisis into an opportunity for deeper understanding. James watched as his community emerged stronger from this challenge, having learned crucial lessons about maintaining balance between progress and preservation. The shadow beings had taught them that growth required adaptation on both sides, magical and mundane working together to create sustainable patterns. As stars emerged above the transformed valley, the creature shared a final vision of how their experience would ripple outward, helping other awakening communities avoid similar difficulties. Pine Valley's story would become a guide for those learning to reintegrate magic into modern life. The night air hummed with renewed energy, flowing smoothly along restored pathways. The shadow beings had reminded them that every aspect of their supernatural ecosystem served a purpose, even those that initially appeared threatening. Through their strengthened connection, James understood that this challenge had been necessary for Pine Valley's continued evolution. They had learned to work with natural processes rather than against them, ensuring that their magical awakening would remain sustainable. The creature gathered the community's magical practitioners for one final lesson, sharing techniques for maintaining the restored balance. Together, they would monitor and adjust the energy flows, ensuring that shadow beings would never again need to appear in such numbers. As midnight approached, Pine Valley settled into its new patterns. The shadow beings had helped them understand that true harmony required constant attention and adjustment, a dance between different kinds of reality that would continue to evolve as their community grew. The future would bring new challenges, but they were better prepared now, understanding that every obstacle could become an opportunity for deeper integration between worlds. The creature's ancient wisdom, combined with modern innovation, would help them maintain the delicate balance that made their magical awakening possible. Thunder rolled across Pine Valley as an unseasonable storm gathered above the mountains. The creature's form shimmered with unusual intensity, responding to something in the charged air that only it could sense. Within the clinic, James felt a familiar tingling, not through his connection with the creature, but from somewhere deeper, more ancient. A loud knocking echoed through the clinic. Rebecca Chen, Linda's teenage daughter, stood at the door, clutching an old wooden box, covered in intricate carvings. "I found this in our attic," she gasped, her hands trembling. "When I opened it, something happened." The creature moved closer, its interest evident in the way its form rippled and shifted. Through their mental link, James felt its recognition. The box contained old magic, the kind that had existed in Pine Valley long before their recent awakening. Amy arrived moments later, her senses registering unprecedented energy readings. "Whatever's in that box is affecting the entire valley's magical field," she reported, showing them data graphs that pulsed in sync with the distant thunder. The carvings on the box began to glow faintly as Bob Parker examined them with growing excitement. "These symbols, they're from the original settlers of this valley, before the town, before recorded history. They tell a story we've forgotten." Dr. Hayes carefully documented the box's unusual properties, while Linda shared what she knew of its history. "It's been in my family for generations," she explained, "passed down with warnings never to open it until the time was right." The creature's mental touch carried understanding. The box was a repository of memories, storing echoes of Pine Valley's earliest magical awakening. Its opening now was no accident, but rather a response to their community's recent transformation. Mark Thompson reported similar boxes being discovered throughout town, each one resonating with the others in a complex harmony. "It's like they're waking up," he observed, watching symbols flash between them in patterns that defied ordinary physics. Emily Foster began collecting stories from Pine Valley's oldest families, uncovering tales of mysterious heirlooms and strange traditions that suddenly made new sense. Each account added pieces to a larger picture of the valley's magical heritage. Through the creature's guidance, they began a careful exploration of the box's contents. Each one released not physical objects, but memories, vivid experiences of how magic had once flowed freely through the valley, shaping both land and community. David Brooks organized teams to map the locations where boxes had been found, revealing a pattern that matched ancient ley lines. Our ancestors knew, he realized. They left us a blueprint for rebuilding what was lost. The creature led them in ceremonies to properly channel the released memories, helping the community integrate this ancient knowledge with their modern understanding. Young and old gathered together, sharing visions of how Pine Valley had once bridged worlds. Dr. Hayes worked to document the scientific aspects of what they were witnessing, though her instruments struggled to quantify the way past and present seemed to merge around the open boxes. "We're not just seeing history," she noted. "We're experiencing it." Linda's Cafe became a gathering point for those affected by the memories, its spaces adapting to accommodate both physical customers and ethereal echoes of past patrons. The strange mixing of time frames seemed natural there, as if the cafe had always straddled multiple realities. Amy's research center began recording the released memories, creating a database that combined historical fact with magical resonance. The technology responded unusually to the ancient energy, producing records that changed subtly depending on who viewed them. Bob Parker found his ancient texts responding to the awakened memories, revealing new layers of meaning that had been hidden until now. The books seemed to communicate with the boxes, sharing knowledge that bridged centuries of magical understanding. The creature guided James through the complexities of managing this awakened heritage. Through their connection, he learned how to help others process the flood of ancestral memories without becoming overwhelmed by their intensity. Sarah Wilson discovered that her previous encounter with magic had left her particularly sensitive to the historical echoes. She began serving as a translator of sorts, helping others understand the messages being conveyed through the ancient artifacts. Principal Chen incorporated the awakened memories into the school's curriculum, helping students understand their community's magical heritage while learning to manage their own emerging abilities. The boxes seemed to respond differently to children, sharing their knowledge more gently. Mark's ranger teams worked to protect newly revealed sites of historical magical significance, their enhanced abilities helping them recognize places where past and present energy patterns intersected. The forest itself seemed to assist them, revealing paths that led to forgotten sacred spaces. Emily's articles about Pine Valley's magical heritage began reaching wider audiences, though something in the box's power ensured that only those ready to understand could fully grasp their significance. Her words carried echoes of the ancient memories, speaking differently to different readers. David Brooks worked with the town council to establish protocols for handling additional magical artifacts as they emerged. The boxes had taught them that their community's transformation was part of a much longer story, one that needed careful management to unfold properly. The creature shared visions of how this rediscovered heritage would shape Pine Valley's future. The boxes hadn't just preserved memories, they had maintained connections between magical phases of the valley's existence, allowing modern practitioners to learn from ancient wisdom. Linda's daughter, Rebecca, found herself particularly attuned to the box's energy, her youth and familial connection making her an ideal bridge between past and present understanding. Under the creature's guidance, she began learning to interpret the more complex historical resonances. Dr. Hayes developed new research methodologies that accounted for both scientific observation and magical memory, creating frameworks that could track how ancient knowledge was integrating with modern practice. Her work would help other communities manage similar awakenings. As night fell over Pine Valley, the storm that had heralded the Box's awakening began to ease. The creature led the community in a ceremony to properly honor their rediscovered heritage, helping them understand that they weren't just recipients of ancient knowledge, but active participants in its continued evolution. The strange snow fell in patterns that seemed to mirror the Box's carved symbols, creating temporary mandalas that mapped connections between different eras of magical awakening. Through these patterns, the community began to understand their place in a much longer story of supernatural integration. Bob Parker's translation efforts revealed that the Boxes were more than just historical artifacts. They were tools designed to help future generations rebuild magical connections when the time was right. Their awakening now confirmed that Pine Valley's recent transformation was part of a much larger plan. The creature shared insights about how other communities might experience similar rediscoveries, suggesting that magical heritage often remained dormant until conditions were right for its re-emergence. Pine Valley's experience would help create guidelines for managing such awakenings elsewhere. As midnight approached, the Box's initial energy release began to stabilize, settling into a steady resonance that would continue to influence the valley's magical development. The creature guided them in establishing practices that would help maintain healthy connections between past wisdom and present growth. Through their strengthened connection, James understood that this awakening of historical memory would fundamentally change how Pine Valley approached its magical integration. They weren't just creating something new, but rather remembering and rebuilding something that had always been part of their community's essence. The future would bring new discoveries as more artifacts awakened, but they were better prepared now, understanding that their recent magical transformation was part of a much older pattern. The creature's wisdom, combined with their rediscovered heritage, would help them move forward while honoring the paths that had led them to this point. Mist curled through Pine Valley's streets, carrying whispers of change. The creature stood motionless at the intersection of Main Street and Cedar Lane, its form shifting between shadow and substance as passing cars' headlights illuminated the unusual fog. Through their mental connection, James sensed its unease. Something fundamental was shifting in the fabric of their reality. A series of rapid knocks on the clinic door drew James's attention. Timothy Foster, Emily's 12-year-old son, stood there with tears streaming down his face. "The magic is fighting," he sobbed. "I can feel it, old and new, pulling apart." The creature moved swiftly to the boy's side, its presence immediately calming. Through their shared consciousness, James understood the child's distress. The valley's recently awakened magic was clashing with ancient powers, creating turbulence that the most sensitive residents could feel. Amy rushed in, her monitoring equipment emitting urgent beeps. "The energy patterns are fragmenting," she reported, showing them readings that pulsed erratically. "It's like different types of magic are trying to occupy the same space, but can't quite mesh." Dr. Hayes arrived moments later, her scientific expertise now seamlessly blending with magical understanding. "The integration is becoming unstable," she observed, watching as the mist outside formed impossible patterns. "We're reaching a critical point where something has to give." Linda's cafe showed signs of the magical tension. Spaces that had adapted to supernatural expansion were fluctuating wildly, walls rippling between physical and ethereal states. The owner herself stood calmly in the chaos, serving coffee that somehow remained perfectly stable despite the reality shifts around it. Mark Thompson radioed from the forest's edge, reporting similar disturbances throughout the valley. "Ancient Trees were phasing between growth stages, wildlife was displaying impossible behaviors, and the very ground seemed to pulse with competing energies. Bob Parker's ancient texts began reacting to the disruption, their pages turning by themselves, as if searching for relevant information. "The old stories speak of this," he said, watching the book settle on passages that glowed with inner light. "When different ages of magic converge, there must be a reconciliation." Sarah Wilson, still sensitive from her earlier magical encounters, described feeling waves of conflict washing through the valley. "It's like listening to two songs played simultaneously," she explained. "Beautiful separately, but creating discord together." The creature shared visions of similar convergences throughout history, moments when evolving magic had to be reconciled with its older forms. Through James, it began showing the community how to help guide this process rather than resist it. Emily Foster's latest articles captured the tension perfectly, her words somehow conveying both the scientific and supernatural aspects of what was occurring. Readers found their understanding shifting as they read, perspectives expanding to encompass larger truths. David Brooks organized an emergency town meeting, though the meeting hall itself kept alternating between its mundane and magically enhanced states. "We need to find a way to stabilize this," he insisted, watching as reality flickered around them. Principal Chen reported that her students were experiencing intense magical manifestations, their natural abilities amplified by the convergence. The school's newly established magical curriculum was proving both essential and insufficient as young practitioners navigated the chaos. Rebecca Chen discovered she could actually see the competing magical currents, describing them as rivers of light flowing through the valley. Her unique perspective helped the creature demonstrate where interventions were most needed. Dr. Hayes worked to document the phenomenon scientifically, though her instruments often provided contradictory readings. "We're measuring something that exists in multiple states simultaneously," she explained. "Our challenge is learning to accept all versions as equally valid." Linda's cafe became a neutral zone where different forms of magic could coexist more peacefully. The space seemed to naturally dampen the conflict, allowing both old and new energies to flow without discord. The creature recognized this effect and began using it as a model for larger-scale harmonization. The town's children proved unexpectedly helpful in managing the convergence. Their uninhibited acceptance of magic in all its forms helped create bridges between conflicting energies. The creature guided them in using this natural ability to help stabilize affected areas. Mark's ranger teams worked to protect particularly sensitive locations where magical disruption could cause physical damage. Their enhanced abilities allowed them to redirect conflicting energies away from vulnerable areas, while the community worked on longer-term solutions. Amy's research center became a hub for understanding the convergence, combining scientific analysis with magical insight to map the interaction of different power sources. The data they gathered would prove invaluable in helping other communities manage similar transitions. Bob Parker discovered references to ancient rituals designed specifically for harmonizing different ages of magic. The creature helped adapt these ceremonies to modern circumstances, creating new practices that honored both traditional and emerging power. Through their strengthened connection, James learned how to help others navigate between competing magical influences. The creature showed him techniques for finding balance points where different forms of power could support rather than oppose each other. Sarah Wilson's sensitivity to magical currents made her an ideal assistant in these efforts. She could feel when interventions were working, helping to fine-tune their approaches for maximum effectiveness. The strange mist continued to flow through Pine Valley, but now it began carrying messages between magical phases, helping to facilitate communication between different expressions of power. The creature used this natural phenomenon to demonstrate how apparent conflicts could become opportunities for growth. Principal Chen incorporated lessons from the convergence into her school's magical curriculum, helping students understand how to work with rather than against competing influences. The creature often visited classes, sharing wisdom about maintaining balance in times of change. Emily Foster's documentation of the process became a guide for other awakening communities, though her articles seemed to reveal different aspects depending on readers' magical awareness. The creature approved of this natural filtering of information based on readiness to receive it. David Brooks worked with the town council to establish new protocols that accounted for multiple valid versions of reality. The creature helped them understand that true stability didn't mean forcing everything into a single pattern, but rather learning to maintain harmony between different expressions of truth. As night fell over the valley, the magical turbulence began to shift from conflict toward collaboration. The creature led ceremonies that helped the community recognize how different forms of power could complement rather than oppose each other. Their experience with the convergence would reshape Pine Valley's approach to magical integration, teaching them that harmony didn't require uniformity. The creature's wisdom, combined with the community's growing understanding, would help them maintain balance between all forms of magic, old and new. The future would bring more challenges as their magical awakening continued to evolve, but they were better prepared now, understanding that apparent conflicts often contained seeds of greater integration. Through their shared journey, they were learning to create space for all expressions of magic while maintaining the stability needed for community growth. Moonlight bathed Pine Valley in ethereal radiance as aurora-like lights danced across the mountain peaks. The creature stood atop the highest ridge overlooking the town, its form now fully revealed in its true magnificence. No longer bound by any pretense of being an ordinary animal, it had become a being of pure light and ancient power, its presence drawing eyes from every window in the transformed community below. James Mitchell watched from the clinic's porch as the sky itself seemed to respond to the creature's energy. The northern lights had never been visible this far south before, but tonight they painted the heavens in sheets of green and purple, creating a natural amphitheater for what was about to unfold. Amy Cooper's monitoring equipment had stopped, trying to quantify the impossible hours ago, instead producing readings that looked more like poetry than data. "We're witnessing something unprecedented," she breathed, watching as reality itself seemed to bend around the creature's power. Mark Thompson and his ranger teams had cleared the area of curious onlookers, though strangely, those who needed to witness this moment found themselves drawn to various vantage points throughout the valley. The creature had carefully orchestrated who would be present for this final revelation. Linda Chen's cafe had somehow relocated itself to the perfect viewing spot, its walls now completely transparent on one side, offering shelter to those gathering to watch. The coffee she served seemed to carry hints of starlight, warming not just bodies, but souls. Dr. Hayes stood among her abandoned scientific instruments, understanding at last that some truths could only be measured by the heart's capacity for wonder. "All our studies were just preparation," she said softly, "helping us build frameworks to contain what can't truly be contained." Through their now profound mental connection, James understood what was happening. The creature had never been just a lost puppy or even merely a magical being. It was a catalyst, chosen by powers beyond human comprehension to help reawaken humanity's connection to the extraordinary. Bob Parker's ancient texts began to glow with their own inner light, their pages turning by themselves to reveal prophecies about this very moment. "When the Guardian reveals its true form," he read in a voice thick with emotion, "the walls between worlds will transform rather than fall." Sarah Wilson, standing with other witnesses near the clinic, described seeing multiple realities, overlapping like transparent paintings laid one over another. "It's showing us everything at once," she explained. "All the possibilities that have always existed alongside our limited version of truth." Emily Foster's pen moved across her notebook without conscious direction, recording not just what was visible, but what could be felt. The shifting of ancient boundaries, the awakening of dormant magic, the expansion of what was possible. The creature's power reached its peak as midnight approached. Through their connection, James shared its intention with the gathered witnesses. This was not an ending, but a transformation. Pine Valley would become a permanent bridge between worlds, a place where magic and mundane reality could coexist openly. David Brooks, watching from the town hall steps, finally understood that no human laws or regulations could fully govern what was emerging. Their role was not to control, but to adapt, to help create spaces where different kinds of truth could flourish together. The strange snow that had become part of valley life began to fall one final time, but now each flake carried complete stories. Tales of how magic had never really left the world, only gone quiet for a while, waiting for people to remember how to see it. Principal Chen gathered her students safely inside the school, though its walls had become permeable to wonder, allowing young minds to witness how education might transform when it embraced more than one kind of knowing. The creature shared its final lessons through waves of pure understanding that reached every mind in Pine Valley. It showed them how to maintain the bridges between worlds, how to honor both science and magic, how to help others remember their own connections to the extraordinary. Amy's research center would become a place where different ways of knowing could support rather than compete with each other. The creature's influence had transformed her scientific instruments into tools that could measure wonder without diminishing it. Linda's Cafe would remain a sanctuary where travelers from multiple realities could rest and refresh themselves. The space had learned to adapt to the needs of any visitor, whether they walked on feet, flew on wings, or moved through means humans had yet to comprehend. Mark's Rangers would become guardians of more than just the physical landscape, helping to protect and preserve places where different kinds of reality intersected. Their enhanced abilities would help them guide others safely through the transformed terrain. Dr. Hayes found herself becoming a teacher of new sciences that embraced rather than excluded magical understanding. Her work would help other communities adapt as the walls between worlds continued to thin across the globe. The creature's final gift was to show them how Pine Valley's transformation would ripple outward, helping other places remember their own magical heritage. The changes would spread naturally, reaching those ready to remember at a pace they could accept. James understood that his role as healer would expand far beyond traditional veterinary medicine. The creature had chosen him not just for his ability to mend physical wounds, but for his capacity to help others bridge the gaps between what they believed possible and what truly was. As the midnight hour struck, the creature's form became pure light, merging with the aurora above, while somehow remaining present in every part of Pine Valley. It had completed its task not by destroying the boundaries between worlds, but by transforming them into bridges. Through their enduring connection, James felt the creature's satisfaction. Pine Valley had exceeded its hopes, becoming not just a place where magic could exist alongside ordinary life, but a template for how such integration could unfold elsewhere. The gathered witnesses watched in awe as their town completed its transformation. Streets that had once been merely physical now hummed with possibilities. Buildings that had once been bound by ordinary architecture now adapted to serve both mundane and magical needs. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and wonders they could only begin to imagine. But the creature had prepared them well, teaching them to face uncertainty with wonder rather than fear, to embrace transformation as an opportunity for growth. As the last of the strange snow fell, carrying messages of change and renewal, Pine Valley settled into its new reality. The creature's presence had become part of the town's very essence, a constant reminder that magic had never really left. It had just been waiting for people to remember how to welcome it home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.